Is Israel a good guide for us, or is it simply just too small of an indicator, kind of like the UAE and Bahrain, by the way, they're right up there as well, to be any meaningful index or indicator for the United States?
I actually think it's a good corollary to look at, Brian. They have some of the characteristics that we would look for, right? That they've obviously vaccinated. I believe it's north of 81% of people over 16. And the vast majority of the unvaccinated are under 16 because you just don't have the vaccine available for that population yet. So in our work, we think the U.S. could be to that point by the middle of the summer. So I think it is something we can potentially look forward to.
Are you suggesting the possibility, and I hate the term, but the possibility of the HI, the herd immunity by midsummer, Matthew?
Yeah, so, in our work, if the U.S. continues on this pace at about 3 million doses a day, we could hit 75% of the eligible population, which is those over 16, by in the next month or two, and by the middle of the summer, everyone could potentially have been vaccinated. Obviously, that depends on people's willingness, but from a supply standpoint, we could definitely be there.
But that also is not factoring in natural or acquired immunity, so it's kind of an extra buffer, perhaps, if you will, and maybe we could advance that. Matthew, does the J&J pause, which is looking more like a stop than a pause, let's be honest, does that impact your projections at all?
It does not. We fortunately have plenty of supply from Pfizer and Moderna, and almost all of the vaccines given so far have been from those two. But the good news is by July, we will have north of 600 million doses supplied from Pfizer and Moderna, which is more than enough to cover the eligible population.
Wow. And we are, to your earlier point, Matthew, and I put this out on social last night, starting to hit peak demand. We're seeing stuff, hey, come on down to the NRG Center in Houston. We got lots of vaccines. I know Louisiana seemed to hit peak demand last week. The U.S. is looking good in many spots. Is it time now for us to start to share the vaccines with the rest of the world? It's good politically, perhaps good economically. How worried are you about the rest of the world's rollouts?
It's important to focus not just on the U.S., but the rest of the world for two key reasons. The first is, obviously, it's a global economy, and you can't turn that completely back on, right, until you have the rest of the globe vaccinated. But I think that the second point is, outside of just the humanitarian aspect, countries that still have high rates of transmission, that allows for potentially new variants to develop. And so it's good for both the U.S. as well as other countries that are going to be earlier on in the vaccination campaign to help with countries outside of the U.S., because the faster we get the global population vaccinated, the less risk that you're going to see more variants develop, which could be an issue even for vaccinated patients.
Yeah, and then I put out, again, seasonality has kind of become a dirty word in COVID circles, but we're starting to get some year-over-year comps, which are starting to look kind of interesting from a seasonality perspective. That aside, Matthew, it's hard to believe. I think there's actually about 4,000 different variants floating around. We focus on a few, the South African, the UK, the Brazilian, but there's a lot. Give us a reason to be optimistic, if you will, about the variants, the vaccines, and where we're headed.
Yeah, sure. So, the positive aspect here is that even though we have some vaccines that have qualities that could make the vaccines less effective against those variants, the vaccines are still quite effective in protecting serious disease or hospitalizations. And so from the perspective of having very severe disease, you don't see that even with some of the most worrisome variants. So I think the hope is that vaccines are quite good at what they do, and that as more and more people are vaccinated and the transmission rates go down, that adds an additional level of protection.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.